Hi there, it's November 22nd and we are continuing our journey through the prophecies of Ezekiel, in Hebrew Ezekiel, meaning the Lord will strengthen, and we're reading chapters 44 and chapter 45 through to verse 12. At the beginning of chapter 44 there's an instruction that the east gate of the city, the one that is the Lord's presence entered in through to go into the temple, should now be closed, and that this should be kept only for the prince, only for the king to be eating in. And so it's kept as a sacred place of sacred entrance because of this fact that the Lord has entered through it. And then there's something of a rebuke that comes again to the people, that the people, although they have come back to the city, although there's this rebuilding, there's still saying that they have worshipped, they've gone to their idols, they've gone to these dung gods, and no one who has been doing that can come into the presence of the Lord again. And so there's a emphasis upon nothing, no one that is unclean, no one that is unholy, no one that is uncircumcised in flesh and in heart. It's interesting, there's this emphasis not just in circumcision of the flesh, but also this circumcision of the heart that the Lord is talking about. And so there's also a prohibition on the Levites serving in close quarters, especially if they've been involved in any sort of idolatry or any serving these foreign gods, except for the Zadokite priests. Now the Zadok or Zadokim, the Zadokite priests, are those descendants again of the Davidic priests. It's suggested by some scholars they might even have been the original Jebusite priests who were there on the mount, descendants of Melchizedek and so on. But the Zadokite priests are the only ones who are allowed to come close to the Lord, and they are allowed to dwell in the presence of the Lord. They're allowed to bring the sacrifices before the Lord. They're allowed to be holy to the Lord. But it's interesting that their vestments are to be all of cotton. There's one point it says where their bonnets and their vesture must be cotton, nothing that makes them sweat. There's a beautiful picture here of not being able to sweat in the Lord's presence. It mustn't be our effort, it mustn't be our toil, it mustn't be the priest's toil that brings them before the Lord. They are to be at complete peace, and so their garments are to be garments that don't make them to sweat. And they're to leave those garments in the vestry. They're to leave them in the vestment area. They're not to take them out into the place where the people are. And then there comes the beginning of chapter 45, this allotment of land around the temple area, a very large allotment of land all surrounding the city. There is to be an allotment for the Zadokite priests. This presumably is for them to keep their flocks and to use for planting their fields. And then there's an allotment, as I say, for the Zadokites, and then there's an allotment beside it for the Levites, for other priests. So they are to be given this land again to work and to till and to keep flocks. And also then there's allotment for the prince. The prince himself is also given land either side. And lastly, in chapter 45 up to verse 12, the prince is reminded that he has to have righteous weights and measures. The Lord is very insistent on the fact that there should be righteous weights and measures in the kingdom of Israel, that his justice should be reflected in the ordinary everyday business, in the ordinary way that people buy and sell, and that they measure things out. We see here, particularly in the instructions to the Zadokite priests, that God doesn't want us coming in our effort before him. This amazing picture of the Zadokites wearing garments that don't allow them to sweat. They're not allowed to wear wool because that will make them sweat. They're to wear cotton. It says again to us that it's not our effort, it's not our human striving that brings us close to God, but it is his call as we come into his presence. It's all about him, it's not about us and our effort. Let's seek to just come before him and thank him for the fact that he is the one who does the work. We are the ones who just receive his goodness as we move and serve before him today. Have a very good November 22nd.